We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
What if the problem that you're trying to solve right now isn't actually happening? What if it's living somewhere else, somewhere in your head or in the future, in a story you've been telling yourself for years? In this episode, I sit down with my brother, Chuck Eigen. He's a psychotherapist with deep Jungian roots and IFS systems background, and he's a meditation teacher and the author of When Thinking is a Problem. We sit down to explore something that I think a lot of us men wrestle with, whether we're realizing it or not, the relationship between thinking, feeling, and awareness. Here's what's true for me. I have been trained my whole life to live in my head, to solve it, analyze it, fix it, figure it out. And for me, thinking might be one of my biggest things getting in the way of me making real progress. Chuck brings together decades of experience from internal family systems to Zen practice to body-based work and helps us see that we are not our thoughts. I am not my thoughts. That there's something deeper, that there's something more stable and grounded available to us. We talk about anxiety, about the difference between thinking and thoughts, about what it means to be hijacked by a part of ourselves, and how to come back into presence, into the body, into relationship. And maybe most importantly, we explore what it looks like to bring this awareness into our relationships with our partners, our brothers, ourselves. This is a conversation about slowing down, tuning in, and discovering that who you are is bigger than anything your mind can come up with. Welcome to the Mankind Podcast. Hey, everybody, it's Boysen. Welcome back to the Mankind Podcast, the podcast where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove that there is indeed more than one way to be a man. Today, I am sitting down with a longtime New Warrior brother and a psychotherapist, teacher, and longtime meditation practitioner, Chuck Eigen. Chuck, say hello.
Hey, Boysen. Thank you so much. Hi.
I am looking forward to this conversation. Let me tell you a little bit about Chuck, and then we are going to get into what he's been up to and the reason that I wanted to get him on the podcast. Chuck Eigen is a psychotherapist, a teacher, a longtime meditation practitioner. He's certified in internal family systems, as well as an advanced practitioner of Rolfing structural integration. He's been a lecturer at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in both human kinetics and in the English department. Chuck was a founding member of the mindfulness community of Milwaukee and is past president of both the C.G. Jung Center of Milwaukee and the Milwaukee Zen Center. Before all this, Chuck was a senior inspector in the Milwaukee Health Department. Chuck is also an author and an editor, and we are going to be talking about his latest book today. So this is going to be a really interesting conversation about thinking. There you go. And let's dive right into it. So first, Chuck, and let's go way back, I guess. What did you do as a health inspector, and why, and how did you make the leap from being a secure servant, city servant, to the rest of your life, all these other things?
I was secure. I mean, when you get a job with the city, that's about as secure as you can get. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in my 20s. And I took all these civil service tests, and I ended up working in the billing department of an ad agency. And I was very depressed. I mean, I hated it there. And one day I got a call from the Milwaukee Health Department, and they finally worked their way down to my name on the civil service tests. And so I took a job there, and I started out being part-time, working, just investigating dog attacks and dog bites and pit bull fights and stuff like that. And it was kind of scary. But I did that for a while, and then they offered me a full-time job as a restaurant inspector. And so I did that. But then I was at the same time studying psychotherapy, and I was a client in psychotherapy, and I loved it. And I guess I had a knack for it. And my therapist knew that I was going to be a psychotherapist before I did. She said, one day you're going to be a psychotherapist, just because I was eating it up. I mean, I loved it. But then I did something called movement work. And you might have heard of Alexander technique or
Yes.
Aston patterning. And so I did something called, it was Aston patterning. And I worked with this woman. And it just blew my mind because I was, a lot of guys, especially, I was pretty much out of touch with my body.
Yeah.
And especially guys, have the role model of an athlete or a soldier where you just ignore your body in order to get the mission done. And part of ignoring the body is ignoring your feelings. And anyway, so she kind of introduced me to my body. My therapist also did. And it blew my mind. And I thought everybody in the world has got to do this. And so I resigned from the health department and went back to school. And my father, by the way, because I was literally fired from high school. I didn't drop out of high school, but when I turned 18, they kicked me out because I was pretty confused and kind of your typical delinquent. And so my father was shocked when I said I was going to quit working for the city. And he said, how many years until retirement? And I said, 35 years. And he said, just coast. Keep the job and just
35 years.
Anyway, I went back to school, and then I was accepted into the Rolf Institute and became a movement teacher, and then a Rolfer, and then an advanced Rolfer. And then also I continued doing psychotherapy and that. But I'll tell you what, when I left the health department, one of the fellow inspectors came up to me and he said, because he was unhappy there too. And he said, how do you quit working for the city? I mean, what do you do? How do you? And I told him, I said, well, find something that you like, that you're interested in, and keep going for that. And at some point, you'll just want to do that.
And that's what you did.
That's what I did. And I appreciated him asking me that because it felt, okay, yeah, I'm able to do that. I was able to quit.
So you went into Rolfing and the teaching at the human kinetics. So there's around movement and around connecting to your body. And you were also an English teacher for some period of time. There's a whole lot just in your bio that's kind of interesting. So what did you teach in English? Just for curiosity.
I taught a class titled Literature and Higher Consciousness. And I was an English major, and that was a class that I took. It was a 3-credit English class. But before that, I taught creative writing in the form of something called the Intensive Journal. I was a teacher of the Intensive Journal with Ira Progoff. And one day I had a question to ask of the chairman of the English department. And I saw that he had Ira Progoff's books on his bookshelf. And I said, hey, I teach that. Can I teach it here? And he said, that'd be great. And so then I had some credibility with him. And then I asked him, hey, I'd also teach this literature class. And he said, that's fine.
And higher consciousness. Your latest book, so now from creative writing into writing and editing and building compilations, your latest book is called When Thinking is a Problem, About and Beyond Thinking. So first of all, congratulations. I've heard from you that it's already outperforming what they expected it to perform, and you got an award for the book as well.
Yeah.
What was the award?
It was one of the International Book Award in the category of nonfiction anthologies.
Very nice.
So other winners are people, Mark Nepo, Pope Francis got an award from that group. Anyway,
Very nice. In
Yeah,
our
I was happy.
conversation setting up for this, so we're going to go into thinking and
Yeah.
being beyond thinking. One of the folks that you brought up was an idea from Adyashanti that 99% of our problems come from being too much in our heads. So, as a therapist, as an author, as a meditator, as a body guy, what have you learned about people and being in our heads?
It's highly overrated. But in a way, we don't have a chance to not be in our heads because that's where the whole culture is. And in school, it's all the focus is all about our heads and our and thinking. I don't remember ever having a teacher ask me how did I feel, or okay, class, notice if there's a funny feeling in your stomach or the pit of your stomach, or how does your chest feel? Does your everybody just take a minute and go inside? Does your chest feel open and free and happy, or does it feel you got a weight on your chest? Or none of that happens pretty much in the public schools that I went to. But yeah, so we're taught to be in our heads pretty much. And but Carl Jung said that he came up with four functions of the personality. It was a kind of a typology.
Yes.
And two of the functions are thinking and feeling. And he called those the rational functions because thinking and feeling are the two ways that we measure what things mean to us.
Mm.
It's how we evaluate our experience is with thinking and feeling. And so if you're only thinking and you're not in touch with your feeling, you only got half of the deck of cards, kind of, for those two. But you mentioned Adyashanti, and I happened to come across the quote where as Adyashanti said 99% of our problems come from being in our head. And I found the paragraph. Can I just read the paragraph?
Please. Yeah.
Because he says it so much better than I would. He says, the quickest access to this openness to your true nature is not so much by thinking, but through the five senses. For example, if you listen to the whole moment and not just the sounds available to the ears, if you feel the entirety of the whole moment, you will be opened beyond the limited space of the me, M-E. It is amazing when you start to let your five senses open up. You realize that 99% of your problem was that you had everything confined, focused in one direction only. And when you open to the whole, everything becomes very clear. I just love the way he said that.
That's beautiful. I am enjoying in the book the way that it's weaving science together, it's weaving psychology together, and it's weaving a lot of kind of philosophical or even religious kind of tradition together,
Mm,
meditation tradition. So you started into the Jung's idea, and you gave us two of the four,
yeah.
thinking and feeling, and the other two of the four are
In,
intuition and sensation.
yeah.
And what you just spoke to with Adyashanti speaks more to that intuition and sensation, the whole moment. So
Thank
go
you.
into there.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I think of it almost in terms of hydraulics, because if I'm only in my head, it's the Ashanti was saying, it's the energy, literally, the energy is kind of forced up into the head. But if I take some time, if I take a minute and I listen to what sounds are there, I feel my body, I'm become aware of my breathing, become aware of the light on the wall, and then thinking is part of this whole picture. Kind of thinking takes its proper place as just another, it's really a sensory function. In the E, they say that thinking is one of the senses. They say we have six senses. And so thinking would be the sixth sense. They don't mean, we say the sixth sense is ESP. They don't
Right.
mean that. They mean it's an actual sense, and the object that the sense of thinking perceives is our thoughts. So, yeah, actually, there's a beautiful technique. I don't know if you ever came across it. It's called mind-body bridging. And
No, explain.
well, it's very popular with a lot of people who have one foot in the Zen community, Zen world, and another foot in psychology. But I'll explain the technique really quickly, and then your listeners can play with this maybe. But what you do is you take a piece of paper and you draw a circle in the middle, and then you write your concern in the middle of that
Okay.
circle. So the concern might be work, let's say.
Yes.
Right. And then you set a timer for 3 or 4 minutes and you write everything that comes to mind kind of around that circle. You might write, oh, there's too much to do. I'm not getting paid enough. My boss is not giving me the better assignments or whatever it might be. And you do that for 4 minutes and you just fill the page. Then you take another piece of paper and you draw another circle in the middle and you write the same word, work. But this time you stop and you just take a minute and you listen to the sounds. If you're inside, the sound might be the sound of your refrigerator or your AC unit. Maybe there are kids outside playing or distant traffic. You feel your body in the chair. Get in touch with your breathing. You feel the pen in your hand. And then you write whatever comes to mind, but this time you only reserve 15 or 20% of your attention to your thinking, and you keep the other 75% with your senses. And so if something comes to mind about work, you write it down, but as you write it down, you watch the ink come out of the pen. And so it's physical therapy, a range of motion exercise in a way, because it's a practice of, practice coming back into my body and opening to my senses, right? Because our senses, the five senses are different than thinking in one very important way. And that is that the other five senses are in touch with the moment, right? Whereas our thinking takes us into the future or into the past usually. And when thinking takes us into the future, I mean, that's where anxiety is. That's what anxiety is, because our mind has taken us into the future. And the irony of anxiety, I think, is that it gives us situations that we can't do anything about because they're not happening. They're in the future. And so anxiety kind of puts us in a groundless place. If I could just say, I had a client some years ago, and she had so much anxiety because she was afraid that her boyfriend was going to leave her. And she said, I'm afraid I can't deal with it if my boyfriend leaves me. And I said to her, you're right, you can't deal with it. She said, I can't deal with it? I said, no, because it's not happening. And she was, you're right, it's not happening. I said, it's possible that your boyfriend will leave you, especially if you're worried about it. But if it happens, you will deal with it because it happens all the time and people deal with it.
This is so relevant. This is so on point. You're a Mankind Project brother. I've been sitting in a men's group for 20 years. And one of the things that I have heard come up in men's group, and this just came up this week, is around this, because catastrophizing, rumination, which are my 25-cent words for anxiety, are things that I absolutely do on a regular basis. And revolutionary statement is, that's a problem for a future me.
Nice.
Not a problem for the me right here sitting in this space. That's a problem for a future me. And there's kind of I think that leads into nicely distinctions between thinking and thoughts. So what's thinking, Charles, and what are thoughts?
Thoughts are the product of thinking. Thinking is the activity of producing thoughts, we could say. But the thinking it has a lot of different meanings. So thinking might mean one thing to somebody and it means something else to another person. So a lot of people think that if they have thoughts, that's thinking. But that's different than someone who actually knows how to use the faculty of thinking and putting it to good use. And some people are really good at that. I'm not particularly good at that. And maybe that's why it's so fascinating to me, because that was kind of not a strong area for me, even though I've written a book on thinking. But someone actually said to me, a Zen priest that was a friend, he said, well, you must be a strong thinker. And I said, no, I said, a strong thinker is somebody, well, the famous scientists or philosophers, or they're marathon runners. And I can get there too, but I can't get there in 2 hours. I mean, it'll take me 2 days to cover 27 miles or 26 miles. So, yeah, I know how to think, but it's kind of not my strong suit, let's say. But it's usable. It's workable for me now. I know the difference now between when I'm actually thinking and when my thought is just producing my brain is producing thoughts, which is a natural function. It's peristalsis. The brain digests information. And so a very common instruction in Zen meditation is to, when you're just sitting there and you're not getting involved in thoughts, they say just regard your thoughts as secretions of the brain or bubbles that come up out of water.
An involuntary product that's just happening.
Right, no problem. Unless there's a problem.
Now let's talk about, I love that distinction. So I'm not thinking, but I can still have thoughts just kind of bubbling up in my head, things appearing. My brain is producing based on processing whatever information I'm aware of or vaguely aware of.
Right. And that's one of the ways that thinking is a problem, is that, for example, you and I are in men's groups, and part of what we enjoy in a group is that people get to share about their lives at an authentic level. And so there's something called, a friend of mine called it the next in line syndrome. And that is when your friend is talking about their life, but meanwhile you're thinking about what you're going to share. And so that kind of thinking's a problem that way. Or if you're just having a conversation and you're thinking about what you're going to say or whatever, that gets in the way of your being in the moment fully. So that's one way that thinking can be a problem, is that it gets in between us and our direct experience of life, right? And the other way that thinking is a problem, I mean, thinking is if you're trying to fall asleep and you just can't shut off your brain, obviously that's a problem. But the other way is that when you need to think, but you're not thinking. And so, for example, there's, I think, a lot of the problems that we're seeing in the public discourse, political discourse, is a lot of it has in common that people just aren't really thinking. They're not thinking about what they're saying. They're not thinking about the source of their information. And they're not thinking about what consequences might befall the other person. Mm-hmm. So they're not thinking about the other person's experience. Mm-hmm. So anyway, different ways that thinking can be a problem.
Or the fullness of the other person, right? The
fullness of the other person, yeah.
The involuntariness of my point. I'm going to get my point across no matter how it impacts you, and without regard for the wholeness of who you are.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Now let's talk about awareness, Mr. Zen Dude. So we've got thoughts, we've got thinking. And let's talk about awareness.
Yeah. So awareness, one way of, that's what the two subjects of the book. are thinking and awareness. And one way of thinking about awareness is that awareness is a room and the sky. The Tibetans say that awareness is the sky, and awareness and thinking is birds flying through the sky. Or Pema Chodron, who's a Tibetan nun teacher, and she says, "You are the sky, everything else is the weather." So, but I think I say in the book, in the introduction or the preface, I talk about how I got into this. And I say that after college, in between college and the rest of my life, I had a lot of confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, really, I'm not bragging, but I had a tremendous amount of confusion, more than the normal person.
More than the average bear.
Yeah, right. But partly because I wasn't in touch with my feelings.
Mm.
And so it's my poor brain was trying to sort out everything. And whereas I wasn't in touch with how I really felt about things.
Yeah.
Anyway, one day the confusion got so bad that it was a storm of confusion. And then suddenly I popped out of the confusion. And now I could say that I got popped into my awareness,
Mm-hmm.
or my awareness kind of pulled me out of it, whatever. And I was more identified with my awareness than identified with the confusion. And from the point of view of my awareness, I watched my brain struggling with trying to sort stuff out in the confusion. And as I watched, and I was surprised how calm I felt and curious.
Mm.
And as I watched with curiosity, the confusion just calmed down. And that was my first encounter with what was that? And anyway, so that was the start of it, I would say. And that's how I work as a psychotherapist pretty much, is I help people shift their identification. What's from their reaction
Mm-hmm.
to their awareness. And you mentioned IFS, it stands for Internal Family
Yes.
Systems Therapy.
Yes.
That's an approach that helps people with that. And in IFS, we call the place of awareness, we call that self, or you could say your true nature. And all of your reactions, we call those parts. And so somebody might come and let's say they're angry or they're sad or they're anxious, whatever. And what I do is I help them make space for what they're feeling and to be able to step back from it and be present to what they're feeling. Whereas before they're identified, yeah, I'm angry. That's just how I am. And then suddenly they can experience themselves being in another dimension of themselves, and they're able to be present. And then from there, take care of business, see what needs to happen. And I love it because I think of it, I've done a lot of trainings and different approaches, but I think of it as one of the most respectful approaches to psychotherapy and to suffering, because it doesn't make the suffering wrong. And Jung was trying to get at that too, really.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. Yeah, please go right there.
Yeah. Because Jung talked about he called it the multiplicity of the psyche,
Mm-hmm.
and that people have really many egos. And you can think of an ego as a self-image. That's one way of thinking of an ego. But none of these defines the person. And so anyway, I lost where I was going with that.
Well, I think that there's an idea in IFS of parts, right? So we kind of talk about it as how our parts and how our parts are interrelating and how they make up an ecosystem of their own, which I think relates so beautifully to Jung's kind of unconscious and shadows, those things which are often unowned parts, owned aspects, unowned egos.
Yes.
Does that resonate for you in your understanding?
Well,
Yeah.
somewhat they're unowned, especially if they're shadow,
Yeah.
or they could be reactions that own us. That's another way of putting it. Sometimes there's a phrase in the IFS community about getting hijacked by a part, or someone else called it that she was suffering from a part attack. And how, but Jung talked about that too, and other Jungians, how we can get invaded by a feeling or possessed by an idea and really being taken over by it. And some people, we all suffer from that. This is part of the human condition. And hopefully, people can find a way of getting free from these limitations. Because all of our parts, they whatever we're feeling deserves to be respected.
Say that
But
again.
whatever we're feeling deserves to be respected, because I think of IFS as kind of a non-violent approach to healing. And there are some approaches to healing that are kind of search and destroy. Let's find a problem and get rid of it, and just, whereas this is from the standpoint of being in yourself, or being in the deepest dimension of who you are. These reactions aren't a problem. In fact, that's how I know when I'm more in self, is that whatever I'm dealing with, it's not a problem. It's something that deserves compassion. That's
Beautiful.
another thing that they don't teach us in school, is how to touch into compassion for ourselves and others.
I was going to go to relationships. So this idea of whatever I'm feeling, whatever I'm experiencing, isn't the totality of what's happening. Whatever I'm thinking and the point that I want to make isn't the wholeness of who I am or what's going on. So how can we bring these understandings into relationship with one another? So now we've gone from a kind of I space to an I and thou space of interrelation.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, one way is when I become familiar with my parts and I learn that my parts don't define me. Whatever I'm feeling, it doesn't define me. Particularly if I'm not identified with it, then it's just something deserving of compassion. Then I realize that the other person too has parts, and her parts or his parts don't define him or her. And one thing, I mean, it helps me to be more tolerant, and also less judgmental, because I don't, however person's being, I don't say, okay, that's him. If he's got some crazy political view, let's say, I don't say, okay, that's who he is. I can see that, wow, that's a part that he might be identified with. And the problem is that it gets tricky in conversation, because if somebody's identified with a part, then there's a tendency to defend that position. Hey, because that's him. He thinks that his opinion, or the place where he's identified with, that defines him. Who would he be without that? And actually, the reality is that who he'd be would be much happier. Not that he needs to change his opinion, but to realize that his opinion doesn't define him. That who he is vast and mysterious, and not something that you can pin down.
Thank you. Something about the relationship between thoughts, thinking, opinions, and feelings that I seem to notice, and I want to check out with you. If I have an opinion and I have that defended place of identity around my opinion, then whatever feelings that I'm having when I'm being confronted by somebody who's maybe pushing against what I think of as my identity, the thoughts and thinking that I think of as my identity, there becomes a circular place of this, right? Where the feeling of fear comes into anger, comes into rage, comes into adding defensiveness. Rather, how can I learn to Not that I ever do this, right? This is not me I'm talking about, of course.
Or me, yeah.
How can I learn to get that space into the bigger room, into the sky that we've been talking about?
Yeah, well, you mentioned that I was one of the founders of the mindfulness community of Milwaukee.
Yes.
And that kind of we followed the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, who is the Vietnamese
Yes.
Zen teacher. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King. And Thich Nhat Hanh was considered an enemy of both the North and the South in Vietnam because he didn't align himself with either. He was aligned with peace. And he had to leave Vietnam, and he settled in France. But where I'm going with this is that Thich Nhat Hanh would advise that if you're having an argument with somebody, that to bring in mindfulness or awareness. It's an application of awareness. And so if you're having an argument with your partner, for example, the skillful thing is to not try and win the argument. The skillful thing is to just stop. And he would say something, darling, I'm not qualified to discuss this with you right now because I'm reacting, I'm feeling angry, and I'm afraid that what I say might be hurtful. And so let's stop for now and let's come back tomorrow and let's talk about it when I'm in a place where I can do a better job.
The only you that you used in that statement was, I'm worried that I might hurt you, that I might harm you. And I just want to reflect back that that was all I statements from the beginning to the end. I am not qualified. I am feeling activated. I am not able to do this right now. I would to come back. So there's no part of which that lays responsibility for the situation or the conflict or the thoughts onto the person that you're interacting with.
Yeah, that's a good catch. I appreciate that reflection, Boysen. Yeah. And just in my own life, in my own marriage, and risked some self-exposure.
Please. We're here for it at the Mankind Project.
Yeah. It's in the early years of my marriage. At one point, I had an incredible discovery for me. It was a good discovery, and that was that in whatever argument we were involved with, that I wasn't going to get what I was looking for.
Yeah.
And I realized, I asked myself once, well, what outcome do I want from this argument? Ultimately, the outcome I want is for my wife to feel good about herself and about me. And I want us to come together. And the outcome I want is understanding. And then I realized that, wow, it's whenever I engage her or anyone else from a place of reactivity, I'm just going to get defensiveness, because reactivity is kind of an attack or a criticism. And by wanting her to go, oh, you're so right, and I'm wrong, and I'm so sorry for disagreeing with you, and I'm going to bake you a beautiful cake and not criticize you for eating it or what. But no, she's wanting me to go, oh, I'm sorry, you're right. But you never get there through an argument. And so I've worked with a lot of couples as a psychotherapist, and I tell them there used to be this idea of fair fighting in marriage counseling. That was a terrible idea, because people just ended up fighting more. And so I tell people, the best advice I can give is use restraint. But it's better to not say anything than to say the wrong thing. Or in parts work, we say, it's okay to express your feelings, but to speak for your feelings and not from them.
Say that again. Yes. Speak for your feelings, not from them.
To speak for your feelings and not from, because if I have a part, let's say I'm having an argument with a neighbor. It sounds like I have a lot of arguments with people. I don't, but I'm just using this. I'm reaching back into my memory. But if I'm upset with somebody, that's a part of me that's upset. And if I let that part take the lead, then what's going to happen in terms of what outcome are we looking for? What's going to happen is I'm going to get a part of them defending.
Yes.
But if I can come from a place of self or mindfulness or awareness or presence, then I have a better chance of being heard, which is the outcome I'm looking for. And I also have a better chance of eliciting the self in the other person.
Yes.
And then we can come away feeling better.
So we're getting around to the end of our conversation. I'm going to come back to the book. So you've gotten to know listeners. Hey, everybody out there, this is Charles. I feel I've gotten to know you pretty well in this short amount of time. And I'm going to talk about when thinking is a problem. So this is an anthology book. It's an award-winning book. I'm going to name some names. So chapters by Thich Nhat Hanh, by Temple Grandin, by Lucy Biven, by Pierre Morin, by Ben Connolly, by Shahaku Akamura, David Bohm, Krishnamurti. There are some beautiful names, and there's some beautiful expansive thinking that goes into these ideas around thinking, not thinking, non-thinking, awareness, meditation, skillfulness, nonviolence. So how should folks get this book? How should folks reach out to you, Chuck?
They can get the book. It's on sale right now at Bloomsbury Publishing. So bloomsbury.com.
Link will be in the show notes.
Okay.
Chuck, I feel there's a lot more that we could talk about here, and this was a good first conversation. We'll have to come back to you with some specific things that we can work on. Wait.
Love to, Boysen.
Therapy for the Mankind podcast. Come sit in on therapy sessions for the Mankind podcast. Yes. Anything that you'd to close with? What's left that you out there in the world?
Yeah, I guess I would say that half of the book is about beyond thinking and the dimension of consciousness beyond thinking. And you could say, what is that? And it's awareness. That's who we most truly are. And so that's kind of a foreign thing for most people. So I've included a lot of chapters where there are dialogues between students, myself, and these teachers who have mastered this higher level of realization. We're asking beginning questions. Well, how do I live with this? How does meditation work? Well, what do I do about this? And so I thought those dialogues would be helpful for people. So the book is, I think, appeals to people that have been into this stuff for a long time or for beginners.
Thank you. Chuck Eigen, this has been Mankind Podcast. Keep coming back, folks. Thank you.
Thanks, Boysen.
This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you make it a heck of a lot easier for us to let men out there in the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if you've been enjoying the music throughout this episode and all of our episodes, check out Jim Donovan and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us, it happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.
Hey, it's Boysen. On the Mankind Podcast, we've brought some incredible guests on to talk about the importance of doing the work to improve our mental and emotional health. And here's the truth. Multiple times over the last 25 years, I've had the help of one-on-one work with some amazing therapists. For me, for my wife, for both of us as adoptive parents, and for our kids. The Mankind Project and Men's Group, though awesome, are not a substitute for professional mental health support. And so I'm thrilled that the Mankind Podcast now has BetterHelp as a sponsor for the show. BetterHelp works online. It asks you what you're working on and then matches you for live one-on-one sessions with a licensed therapist, someone trained to work with you, listen, and offer helpful insights. I'm using BetterHelp. It's super easy, and I like what I'm getting. If getting one-on-one support in the comfort of your own space feels like a good direction for you, I invite you to check it out. Go to the link in the show notes or betterhelp.com/mankind. And if you sign up, you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy.